I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. Not too long ago, the climate group Declare Emergency decided to block traffic on the Capital Beltway as a way to force President Biden to announce a climate emergency and to work toward truly mitigating the crisis we are in. Political change is widely believed to come through disruption. Power, they say, concedes nothing. From Gandhi's theory of non-cooperation with India's British rulers, to the American civil rights movement's use of sit-ins and marches, the ability to disrupt regular life has been a tactic in the pursuit of political change. Equally, those who disrupt pay a price. The Declare Emergency activists were arrested, prosecuted, and jailed. I spoke with Regan and Nora Swisher, two activists who went to jail, and with Paul Severance, the group's spokesperson, to ask them how they think their disruption of traffic would bring them victory. As I was preparing this interview, news came in of my state senator, Ben Kramer, exchanging tough words with members of the Montgomery County Council about a plan he has to reform and restructure land use planning in the county. When asked, he too claimed to be engaging in disruptive politics, setting up a counterpoint to the bottom-up disruption of the climate activists. Disruption, it seems, could come from above. What was his theory of victory? Stick around.
You know it's true. You must be fooling me. I ain't a fooling you. Come on, baby, take good advice. There ain't no bargains, you pay the price.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Before we continue, I want to tell you about a podcast I'm enjoying right now that also looks at politics, public service, and the processes of government. Reimagining Government is a new podcast from the Center for Public Impact and Apolitical. The Center for Public Impact is a global not-for-profit which helps reimagine government so that it may work for everyone. Apolitical is a social learning platform that helps public servants build knowledge, skills, and connections they need to solve the hardest challenges facing our societies. From the climate crisis to equitable health care and rebuilding trust in marginalized communities, Reimagining Government explores how governments under increasing pressure can deliver results while remaining trusted and relevant. You can listen to Reimagining Government on apolitical.co or on your favorite podcast platform. Music for this episode comes from Takoma Park native Richard Mark Stout, who goes by the stage name Reggie Right-Eye. Here he leads a band called The Missing Pieces. You can find Reggie Right-Eye and The Missing Pieces regularly at the Hell's Bottom VFW post in Takoma Park.
It's got to smell just a little bit. You must be leaving me. I ain't leaving you.
In the news this week, Maryland inaugurated its first black governor and its first Indian American lieutenant governor. Westmore will only be the sixth black state governor in the history of the United States, and two of them took office during the Reconstruction in Louisiana. Moore is the fourth in the modern era. Aruna Miller becomes the second woman to be the state's lieutenant governor, a position created in 1971. Brooke Learman became the first woman comptroller, and Anthony Brown the first black attorney general for the state. The leadership in the Maryland General Assembly changed in recent years, but the Moore-Miller administration has picked up several legislative leaders for the executive branch, and there appear to be newcomers in both branches of the state government. On the campaign trail, Moore had repeatedly used a slogan from his Army background, "To leave no one behind." How this translates into policy will be very interesting to see. While the Army slogan applies to the injured and the dead on a battlefield, in public policy, "Leave no one behind" requires targeting resources to specific groups, a function that governments have struggled with for decades. The prospect of one-party rule in Annapolis has raised expectations for strong progressive advances, and the state's unprecedented budget windfalls will make some dreams come true. But Moore has already cautioned against expecting the state to do it all. Rather than harmony and lockstep, the political science of one-party rule says that control of the executive and legislative branches doesn't suddenly create a church with a singular doctrine and a clear hierarchy. What you get instead is the subsummation of what used to be inter-party politics within one governing party. Institutional differences between legislative and executive branches come to the fore. Personalities become relevant, more so. Geography comes into play. Westmore wasn't Montgomery County's first choice in the primary. Indeed, the county fielded several gubernatorial candidates from Takoma Park alone. Eventually, the county and the state consolidated behind Moore. But that initial snub may matter. Moore's lieutenant governor, Aruna Miller, is from the county and seems likely to be quite influential. But it would be hard for anyone to target resources to Baltimore and Montgomery at the same time. Lake Forest Mall, an iconic shopping mall in Gaithersburg built in the 1970s, is coming down after 45 years to be replaced by a mixed-use residential and retail complex. The Lake Forest Mall was built in the classic mall style with a center with radiating arms anchored by big box stores like Macy's and Sears. That old style of commercial development has ended, and the new look is that of mixed-use town centers like Pike and Rose in Rockville and Crown in Gaithersburg. Lake Forest sits on the eastern side of the city of Gaithersburg, which has long been neglected for the Tony Quinn's Orchard area and the pioneering mixed-use development in Kentlands. Maybe this will be the start of a new era for East Gaithersburg. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I am Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with Will, Regan, Nora Swisher, and Paul Severance of the climate action group Declare Emergency.
Spin around how the polecat go. I got a honky-tonk woman lives way downtown. Well, she don't take no lip, but she does mess around. Well, you dance off the side, dance up the middle. Throw up your hands, shout, hey, diddle, diddle. Got a honky-tonk woman lives way downtown. Yeah, she don't take no lip, but she does mess around.
Nora Swisher, Will Regan, Paul Severance, welcome to I Hate Politics. Would you mind introducing yourself one by one? Maybe Paul, go first.
Yeah, my name's Paul Severance. I'm 61. I live in D.C. And I've been active with Declare Emergency for about a year now.
Nora?
Yeah, my name's Nora Swisher. I'm a Montgomery County resident. I live in Silver Spring. And I'm here, I guess, because I've participated with and volunteered for Declare Emergency since July this year.
Wonderful.
Will Regan. I'm a former video game developer, former computer science grad school student for 3 years, but now I'm full-time activist trying to save the planet.
Speak a little bit about what Declare Emergency is. Who wants to take that?
I can. Declare Emergency is a campaign asking for the president to declare a climate emergency using nonviolent civil resistance.
How large is the organization now?
We have about, I'd say, 60 or 70 people involved in various aspects. Yeah, it's growing.
Well, what is the most dramatic action you have taken with Declare Emergency?
By far the most dramatic one is when we blocked the Beltway around DC for the second time. So the first time it got under the skin of a particular judge, but the second time was really dramatic because it carried more steep sentences, and it felt like a more emotionally connective. It was on Indigenous Peoples Day, so we had Indigenous people out there in the street, like a dozen of them with us, and it was just a great action. I served 23 days altogether for that action in the Montgomery County Jail, so it carried real consequences as well. But that was the most dramatic thing. I know it doesn't sound dramatic, but there's like a pipeline from anything that goes on around DC to like national news, and it could be quite striking to see a group of activists sitting on a highway, shutting down a highway.
Nora, were you with Will, and you went to jail too, right?
Yeah, I was. He and I were kind of on opposite ends of the highway, so I wasn't, he wasn't right next to me, but we were there together. And my sentence wasn't so bad because this was my first arrest. I wasn't a repeat offender like Will, so I only spent a couple days in jail.
Was that your sentence, or did you get was it shortened for you?
So my sentence was technically 60 days in jail, but the judge suspended 56 of those days, meaning I was only expected to spend 4 days in jail. If I break my parole in the next year, I believe I have to go back and serve the rest of it.
What does it mean to break the parole?
I believe it's getting arrested again in any way. It's the paperwork and all that they give you, it doesn't really spell it out exactly.
Will, Nora just described you as a repeat arrested. I don't know. I don't want to say offender because you're not. And so you got under the judge's skin, you said. Who's the judge? What does she say?
So Judge Koch is like I guess she's kind of a big thing in Montgomery County. She's one of the, I don't know the exact name for it, but she's one of the top level judges. She also has $50,000 in fossil fuel investments, we discovered, but I guess we probably shouldn't get too much into that. But she just had a lot of, sound bites that she'd like to send our way. And I think her statute, her basic stance was that, I'm going to crack down hard on these guys from their first action. She sentenced everybody to 4 days in jail, and they're not going to come back, and seeing us coming back in the exact same place. She admitted that, it irked her. It really irked her. And she wanted to carry a stricter sentence this time. So what
was your sentence?
So I got 60 days but 30 days suspended. And that eventually equated to about 23 days all told, because the program at Montgomery County allows for time served and for good behavior and things like that. So and then also I had 45 days of house arrest as well before any of this happened. So it's like one of the ways that the government will sort of clamp down on you. It's sort of like undermining dirty pool, like the things they do before the trial has even happened. They're already, characterizing you as a villain, basically. You're walking around with a GPS, and you can't go anywhere within 50 miles. You've got a curfew. I was the only one that got this treatment. Full disclosure, I believe in, this cause and these sorts of actions. So I've done 11 arrests this year with Extinction Rebellion and mostly with Declare Emergency. I was the only one that had this happen, but a GPS monitoring, a special beacon. I didn't live in Maryland, but I was forced to live in Maryland, actually in Nora's driveway and sort of in my camper. I couldn't leave, which, was a big deal for me because I was actually thinking of, campaigning for Warnock or doing different things in between. I couldn't leave Maryland, and I had a GPS and I had a curfew, and it was 45 days. It was a long time. And psychologically, it got to me. It was a tough thing that I just wasn't even mentally prepared for, just to lose my freedoms like that.
Are you not allowed to hang out with friends? I mean, did they?
You are, and for some reason I just didn't. I mean, my whole everything that I'd been doing all year just kind of stopped, and I just kind of sat in the RV or sat in the driveway. So I don't know. For some reason, it affected me differently.
Let's talk about what and how you hope to win. What is your theory of victory?
Okay, so we are a nonviolent civil resistance organization. I just want to amplify the fact that all the stuff we just talked about, what everybody got arrested for, it was all nonviolent civil resistance. Nobody got hurt. There was no property damage. That's very important. So that's the first thing. But we have a theory of change, and that is that we are trying for, and this is an aspirational strategy, we're trying for mass mobilization on a sustained basis, creating disruption that brings business as usual or interferes with business as usual. And that would force the government to respond. And they have three different responses, really. They can just let you do it, keep doing it. They can accede to your demands. And our demand is for President Biden to declare a climate emergency. And he can do a lot of things after he does that. He can stop petroleum exports. He can stop drilling on federal and indigenous land. He can do a lot of stuff with that. So we want him to do that. And that's a first step towards tackling this problem. And that's our demand. And then that's the second option, is for them to accede to our demand. And the third option would be for them to repress. And usually in revolutionary movements of the past, or movements that wanted massive change, you have to go through a repression period. And that's what we're in. We're affiliated with a bunch of groups in Europe called the A22 Network. They are really getting it bad, worse than us as far as the repression goes. They're a little bit further along the continuum, I guess.
What Paul just said reminded me, there's a quote from Gandhi that goes, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win.
Where are you here? Are they laughing at you? Are they fighting you? Where do you think you are?
I don't know if it's a strict progression. On social media, we get the clown comment a lot. I guess I'm interpreting that as laughing. Mm-hmm. I know there are some people still ignoring us. But the more we can bring the tension and the conflict to a head, the sooner we will get to transformational change, we hope.
Will, have you thought about this?
For me, it's not really about strategy per se, like A is going to be the lead to C, lead to D. I mean, you don't show up on your first day of work and expect to have retirement, set for you. No, you have to put in many years. And it's the same way with defending the planet and going into servitude for our planet. It's like, this is an endeavor that you sort of have to become emotionally attached to in a serious way to achieve what will be victory, I think.
But there's some tension in what you say. On the one hand, we want Biden to declare an emergency, which is here and now. And on the other hand, you're suggesting this seemingly timeless retirement game. That's a different time horizon.
To be clear, I mean, I don't think you can retire. I think this is like a lifelong post that we all have to kind of take up, is this planetary protection idea.
In the chat, Nora mentions Montgomery County. Montgomery County has declared emergency. But to what end? They declared emergency 2018, not now. So almost 5 years now. But to what end? What has the county done as a consequence of the climate emergency? If you look at the climate action plan, it has 87 things to do. I have done several episodes on climate change, and including one on the climate action plan, which I called that the county seems focused on resilience over prevention. Right? Most of the things that they want to do, can do, is not about prevention. Right? It's about how to prepare when it hits the fan.
You're absolutely right about the nice words. The 87 things they wrote down, they think they're done. And that's a problem. Joe Biden says I think he said climate emergency is the issue of our time. So did Obama. And that's a characteristic of, frankly, I think, liberals on this issue. They say the right thing and they do nothing. And that's what's happened here.
I mean, what we're up against is status quo. And status quo is not just going to change, because we ask it to nicely.
But will they change if you buy stopping traffic on 495?
When disasters happen like hurricanes, and, stuff hits the fan, in a localized area, you do see emergency response. Like, I remember Hurricane Ian, I saw images on social media of standstill traffic from people evacuating Florida because of the hurricane. And, what we're doing is kind of like that. We're creating standstill traffic on a highway. But when we do nonviolent civil resistance, we're not destroying homes and killing people the way a hurricane is. And I know we haven't reached like this social tipping point yet where we get meaningful action, but we are hoping to grow and create more sustained, ongoing disruption to that end.
350 Montgomery, the Sunrise Groups, Extinction Rebellion, they organized a climate protest outside the county executive's office in Rockville. And in a county of 1 million people, maybe 50 showed up. You're fighting apathy even more than you're fighting the government.
It doesn't really take that many people to make a big change. I mean, if you look at Just Stop Oil again, I don't know exactly how many active people they have going out on the streets getting arrested, but I doubt it's more than 500. So you're not talking about a huge number of people to make that kind of impact. We need supporters, definitely, much, much greater than that 500. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 people getting arrested.
Do you have an arrow that pierces this apathy? Is this your Woolworth lunch counter?
I think that apathy comes from some common myths that are in our society surrounding the climate crisis. And those two myths are kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum, and we're kind of trying to stay in the middle of them. So one side is we're all doomed anyways, so what's the point? And the other side is like false hope, basically, that somebody or something is going to save us, like some technological thing, maybe. And the reality is in between. The reality is, like, we are kind of screwed. Like, there's a lot of things that are going to go bad because of the emissions that have already happened. But it's not too late for harm reduction. And if people, if the media and people can talk about it in those terms instead of the two other extremes, like, oh, the carbon capture will save us, or, everything's terrifying and all you can do is curl in a ball and with your eco anxiety, like, we need to come together and act in service of that harm reduction.
Here is the dichotomy. I mean, there are people that believe that we're doomed and nothing can be done. And on the other hand, Elon Musk and his Tesla is going to save the world. That disagreement in itself is the reason we don't get action. If we had consensus in society, I would imagine that governments would respond. Democratic governments would respond. Now, they don't always do in practice. There's theory and practice, but at least in terms of democratic theory, that should work. But it's not working because there isn't that consensus. The 87-point climate action plan for Montgomery County, by the way, is evidence of the problem. Those 87 points come from different climate groups who cannot get themselves to agree on 3. If the climate groups can have consensus, how do you expect the politicians to have consensus? How do you expect them to do the right thing?
You talked about Al Gore and Inconvenient Truth, and there's other people like Bill McKibben who've been involved for years and years in the climate arena. And XR's been around, in the Sierra Club and Arm in Arm, and all these other organizations have been around. I think all of us, and I was involved with XR prior to being involved with the DE, and I think all of us have done stuff with climate prior to being involved in DE. All of us have to say that we have failed. We have failed. Look where we are today. Everything we've done, Vice President Gore and John Kerry, they need to say they failed because look where we are. And that's part of the problem.
The coral reefs are dying, but we are traveling to the coral reefs in long haul flights that are destroying the coral reefs. The cognitive dissonance is astounding. The problem is not that there is cognitive dissonance, but the persistence of cognitive dissonance over such a long period of time and our ability to live with it. And the thing that amazes me is the fact that you are only 60.
I follow this account about celebrity jets, and it tracks all the jets that celebrities are flying around in. And one of the main ones was Taylor Swift. And I don't know why it stuck in my head, but then all of a sudden Taylor Swift occupied all top 10 of the Billboard 100. It was the first time anybody had occupied all 10 slots. And I was thinking to myself, like, we're just telling the wrong stories. Taylor Swift is responsible for that, but we're also buying all those Taylor Swift albums, and she's not a role model for how we need to act. She's not telling. I didn't listen to the music, so I don't know. But my guess is that change is going to happen in the street. It's not because we're listening to a Taylor Swift album, whatever story she's telling. We need to tell new stories. We need to be investing in something other than this consumption lifestyle.
Okay, so how?
I mean, I think we have to think creatively. What
are your ideas about this?
Obviously, there's a lot of really good indigenous knowledge out there, all over the world, and even in our own ancestors and things, and that we could look into. That's just one step, I think. I'm not really. We're sort of training ourselves not to be solution sort of oriented and more about the process because I don't want to have any sort of affiliation with I've been a vegan for 25 years. I love riding my bike, and all these little things that I do, but I don't want to necessarily, say that this avenue is the method for change, because right now it's about the radical cost of getting in the street. Like that's what's the most necessary thing. So like getting into the particulars might not be my thing. I don't know.
I can see that. I can absolutely see that. But that in itself, I think, is a limitation on the mobilization that you're hoping for. I mean, it's absolutely important as an individual protester to have the mindset that yours is to do, not to worry about the results. It's like a karma thing, right? And it's super important to do, because if you start worrying about the results, you might be discouraged.
We're asking people to line up behind getting a state of climate emergency. That's the step we're asking them to do right now. And then after that, we're going to make President Biden do what he said the United States government do what they can under that emergency to make things better. And then after that, there's going to be something else, like Just Stop Oil is trying to stop all new gas and oil leases in Britain.
Well, I'll consider those your words to President Biden, but I'll let you close with words to Council Member Gabe Albornoz, who has been critical of Declare. Do you want to say something to him? I'll make sure it gets there.
I wasn't prepared for this one.
Take your time.
Paul, do you remember what he tweeted?
I think he said something simple like, this just has to stop. They can't keep doing this or something.
That reminds me of what the judge said too. There's a lot of authority figures who say this is not the right way to go about things. And on the surface level, yeah, duh. We know we're breaking the law. But it's necessary. I mean, nothing else has worked. They're not listening, and they're not protecting their own constituents against this fossil fuel death project.
It reminds me of this what they said in court against Paul and Michelle when in DC. They asked the question, like the lawyer, it almost sounded like the voice of the Smith from the Matrix. He's just like, Mr. Severance, is there any legal means within your grasp to change the system? Like, it was like, come on. We're talking about a tradition of getting our voices heard. Yeah, protesting is going to be a part of it. Duh. Like, we can't, it's unfathomable to me that I just think it's just talk. Like, if they're saying stop protesting, that's just talk to me. That's just too out there that they would think that we would stop protesting.
Good luck to you all. I hope you find success. I hope you can cut through our apathy.
Thanks, Sunil.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I got the blues the other night. I started drinking and I started a fight. I went home all bloody and bruised. I said, oh baby, I got the blues. She said, oh Reggie, when I'm through with you, you'll really know something about the blues.
That was Will Regan, Nora Swisher, and Paul Severance of the Climate Action Group Declare Emergency. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with Maryland Senator Ben Kramer.
The blues, he said, oh buddy, when I'm through with you, you'll really know something about the blues.
Ben Kramer, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you.
You introduced two Montgomery County related bills for this session. One on restructuring the Maryland National Parks and Planning Commission, and the other to bring it some transparency and other matters. Could you describe what your bills are about?
The first bill is one that would simply create a task force to look at how we might possibly unwind Montgomery County's side of park and planning and determine what, if any, of the existing work of park and planning could be brought into Montgomery County government. And the intent and the purpose here is to facilitate and streamline the government process. For instance, right now, if someone is looking to build a project in Montgomery County, it's a two-track process. They have to go through Montgomery County's permitting services, and they have to go through park and planning's land use and planning process. Also, for instance, parks and recreation. We have Montgomery County's recreations department, and then we've got one over in park and planning. The second bill, I think, is critically important because the goal with that is to create some transparency and openness with regard to park and planning. I have been receiving over many years lots of complaints from constituents saying that the Park and Planning Commission seems to tune them out, does not provide transparency and openness with their meetings and how things are being done. And I think we have seen the debacle that took place just a couple of months back where the entire Park and Planning Commission membership was forced to resign. The bill that I am introducing would require that certain meetings be open to the public, that the public be able to participate, that they be given notice of when these meetings were to occur. It would create a little bit of parity between the legislative branch, our county council, and the executive branch, our county executive, in that currently the county council appoints all 5 members of the Park and Planning Commission.
So I can see why you think this will increase representation, right? But I'm not seeing how this will lead to transparency.
The purpose of the bill, transparency and accountability. And it can be difficult to have one without the other, and they both need to be addressed. A big problem of what we have had with our commission is accountability. And there have been lots of questions raised about the relationship between our county council and certain commissioners and what those interactions were.
So it's one thing to ask for that kind of transparency and to alter the balance of power, if you will, in the appointment process so that, you're getting some pushback now on both bills, given that you want to redistribute this power. If your goal is a limited one, why not just focus on that? Why have this broad mandate that actually shifts the balance of power?
Because going back to my earlier comments, I believe accountability is an important piece of this legislation, and trying to have greater accountability, in my mind, is a very important piece of what it is that I am seeking to accomplish. And yes, you're right, there is pushback. And when you think big and you think outside of the box, you're going to get pushback. When you are looking to disrupt the establishment, there's going to be pushback. But look at the bill hearing. Of the people who testified in support and against the bill, overwhelmingly the citizens, the residents, supported the legislation. The opposition was the establishment. Our county council opposes it. The Park and Planning Commissioners themselves, not surprisingly, oppose the bill.
County council was just expanded. It is significantly different from past county councils. It's, a woman majority council. It's vastly more representative of the population of Montgomery County. They have a right to speak. Meanwhile, the people that you speak of in terms of citizens supporting are also the status quo folks.
The people who live in the county, the residents of the county, the voters in the county overwhelmingly support the legislation.
How do you know that?
Because I was at the bill hearing. I sat there at the bill hearing and listened to the people who were testifying, and they were representing the civic organizations, some of whom have hundreds, others thousands, others tens of thousands of members.
What kind of policy consequences do you foresee from your proposals?
I think my goal in the legislation, and I think what the legislation would accomplish, is to bring the residents a little bit closer to the process.
Okay, so that's a good representation goal.
That's the entirety of what it is I am seeking here.
We set up institutions, agencies with degrees of independence. For instance, in the federal government, we have the Federal Aviation Authority that is somewhat independent of the rest of government. We have the Federal Reserve, which is, dramatically independent of the executive branch. Sometimes we say the Attorney General's office is, set apart at an arm's length, right? So there is a case, good governance case, for independence of certain agencies. Is that a consideration with respect to parks and planning, that it should maintain some level of independence, right? If you bring it within the county government, I assume within the executive branch, and especially merge it with the...
All right, can we pause? When you say bring it into the executive branch, again, that is a misrepresentation that I have been hearing since the introduction of the bill.
I did read the bill text last night,
Yes.
in fact, in preparation. And
Yes.
it says bring parks and planning under Montgomery County government. But it is not clear which part of Montgomery County government or how those authorities will then be divided and subdivided. The way that you described it, are there synergies to be found by merging planning with the Department of Permitting Services, which is what you said at the beginning of our conversation? That would imply that you were suggesting that parks and planning be merged in a single agency with the Department of Permitting Services, which presumably, I'm assuming, would be under the executive branch.
Well, no, the answer to that is no. That's not, that is an incorrect representation. There are aspects that would go under permitting services. There
Such
are
as?
aspects, some of the process for getting a permit to build, to develop, whatever it may be in Montgomery County. And that's where we have the two-track system right now. We've got Montgomery, you got to go through Montgomery County Permitting Services now, but you also have to go through the Park and Planning Commission.
So when you merge the two tracks, what happens in your view?
I think we have savings for the taxpayers.
Where?
And I think we also have a streamlined process for those who are looking to do a project.
That means, to me at least, that you are combining the agencies as well. But are you saying that the agencies remain separate, but the process is somehow single track? And if they will be merged, where would the authorities lie? Would that lie with the executive branch or the legislative branch? Or if there's a combination, what is that combination that you think in your head?
So the authority that the county council has now is over the final land use and planning process, much of which is recommended by the Park and Planning Commission. And that is what the county council has now, and that would remain with the county council. Where there are duplicative services like oversight of recreation facilities and parks, that would be moved into what currently exists now.
The criticism that I have heard, right, is that the way the bill is written, in order to constitute that task force, where almost 9 out of 13 members are essentially appointed by the county executive. So that balance of power that you were trying to engender, right, is actually within the task force, in terms of who gets to appoint members to it, it is heavily weighted in the direction of the county executive.
The reason there are representatives from the executive branch on the body, on the task force, is that those are the heads of the agencies where there is duplication of services.
Essentially, the county executive in the appointment process gets 9 out of 13. Now, I'm not saying that this is bad or right or good, right? I'm saying that given that situation, do you not expect the county council to push back?
No, actually, I had not. I offered to the county council the opportunity to say, hey, we want more people on this task force because somehow we don't think it's balanced. And I said, that's fine. When I spoke to the county council, I said, give me other options.
Did you have this discussion with any county council member prior to your presentation of the bill?
No.
Do you think that would have been a good idea?
No. I don't see what the advantage would have been. The introduction of the bill is the beginning of the conversation.
As it turned out, the presentation probably did not go as you had probably hoped. Politically speaking, what do you think are your chances of pushing this through with that kind of opposition?
I truly do not have a clue. And to be honest with you, that is not the greatest of my concerns. Look, ultimately, the Annapolis delegation will, amend it, kill it, support it. And whatever that outcome is, that's the outcome.
Do you have a straw poll in the delegation?
To know that bills get introduced, bills die, bills pass, and they get amended. Right. So, from my perspective, I'm not concerned that the county council is not supporting the legislation. I'm glad that the county executive
But you don't see any interaction between the council and the delegation?
Sure. I'm one of the people that helped bring together what used to be a very difficult relationship between the county council and the delegation. Look, I've been around a long time. I'm okay with that, and so be it.
Do you think then there is something to be said about some agencies having political independence, independence from the rest of government, just like the Federal Reserve has? WSSC, for example, remains independent and is, they are not subject, I think, to similar kinds of arguments about, bringing them under the county.
I have already been having conversations with state leaders about we need to look at WSSC and the significant problems they are having. And so, again, this isn't me targeting park and planning. I am looking at all of these quasi-governmental agencies and how do we make them better? And trust me, there are no shortage of folks who are saying WSSC is just as problematic as park and planning. And that doesn't necessarily mean we look at unwinding it, but we certainly need to start having a conversation about how do we address the relationships there.
Ben Kramer, thank you for coming on IHP Politics. Good luck in the session.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Something about feeling bad. Really know something about the worst you ever had. You'll come out with a whole new point of view. You'll really know something about the blues.
What lessons can we draw from my conversations with Maryland Senator Ben Kramer, who argues that he's practicing disruptive politics by proposing to restructure and reform land use planning in Montgomery County against the wishes of the county council? And with Will, Regan, Nora Swisher, and Paul Severance, climate activists from the group declare emergency. First, advocates for political change will claim disruptive politics whether they are a former computer science graduate student or a longtime state senator whose father was once a Montgomery County executive. The claim to disruption not only comes from the bottom, but also from within the establishment itself. This is both a beautiful thing about democracy, where anyone can pick up the mantle of the outsider, and why regular folks become frustrated with it. If the entire enterprise of democracy is based on contests of claim making, where is the truth? How do we move forward? But surely there has to be a difference between the disruptive work of climate activists and the intramural contestation between two sets of elected officials. Well, in one case, they went to jail. They were GPS monitored. Will Regan expected to go to jail. But what got to him was the loss of his freedom that prevented him from going to other protests from which he finds his life's meaning. He was stuck in an RV on a Silver Spring driveway. In the other case, it is unclear to me whether Senator Kramer is likely to succeed in pushing his bills forward. With the county council unanimously opposed to his changes, the Montgomery County State Delegation, and eventually the Maryland General Assembly, is going to weigh both sides. And when the ruling class is so divided, it is unlikely change will occur. Will the disruptions of Regan, Swisher, and Severance and their fellow activists force President Biden to declare emergency, or even make Montgomery County take its own declaration of a climate emergency seriously? As yet, their disruptions have not been large enough or widespread enough to be taken seriously. They need to pierce our own apathy before government leaders are likely to pay attention. In order to develop a persuasive theory of victory, they need to have a theory of how to grow their movement. If I were to predict, expect bigger and more dramatic disruptions. That's all for this episode. You've been listening to IHP Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Takoma Park native Richard Mark Stout, who goes by the stage name Reggie Right-Eye. Here he leads a band called The Missing Pieces. You can find Reggie Right-Eye and The Missing Pieces regularly at the Hell's Bottom VFW post in Takoma Park. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please sign up for updates at our brand new website, ihppod.org, where you can also sign up to get the podcast sent directly to you. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Almost got killed trying to cross the street. Now this woman on the phone just stepped on both my feet. She didn't raise her head or even say a thing. Now I can't wait to see what this day will bring. I wish I was back packing for an